Moving on to the session for today, I am more than pleased to introduce our moderator for today, Cheryl J. Thornton. Cheryl is a senior business leader with multi-sector experience and more than 20 years working in the education, not-for-profit, retail, real estate, banking, and aviation sectors. She has worked across several jurisdictions, including UK, Asia, Oceania, Middle East, and Africa. Cheryl is highly experienced in leading people, strategies for growth, business turnaround, technology, and cultural transformations. Presently, she's the Director of People Services with a large education group and responsible for 4 business verticals: people and culture, growth and retention, customer experience and community engagement, and marketing and communications. Cheryl is also active in the international and local community. She's an adjunct lecturer with PwC Academy Middle East, an assessor with the Dubai Quality Group, and a mentor with the Cherry Blair Foundation. She's also a charter member with us in TiE Dubai. She's the perfect person to moderate the Bayzat today. Without further ado, Cheryl, the stage is yours. I will also just launch a very quick poll just to understand who's in the audience. But Cheryl, please do carry on.
Thank you, Cicely, for the warm introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be joining as moderator for this TiE talk, Is This How Unicorns Get Made? Traditionally, the GCC is highly sought after internationally as a potential source of capital, given the concentration of sovereign wealth funds, family offices, large local banks, and successfully locally owned international conglomerates. However, in the past 12 months, we've seen startup system adapts to the COVID-19 pandemic, now into the venture capital space to participate in tech plays in the region. In the next hour, we are going to get candid with 2 brothers and learn about their incredible journey of raising $35 million to date as the co-founders of Bayzat. Bayzat is a UAE-based company founded in 2013 and has a purpose to make world-class employee experiences accessible to every small and medium-sized enterprise and employee benefits. So just a reminder before we get started to please type your questions in the Q&A and we will try to answer as many questions as we can. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to introduce Talal Bayaa, the co-founder and CEO of Bayzat. Talal is responsible for providing the vision, overall leadership and strategic management for Bayzat, as well as ensuring the highest quality of services provided. Prior to setting up Bayzat, Talal worked for a private equity and corporate finance firm, followed by 2 years at an investment bank. Talal studied bioengineering at the University of California, and he is a CFA charter holder, as well as a finance, investment, and banking expert. And I'm equally delighted to introduce Talal's brother, Tarek Bayaa, co-founder and CMO of Bayzat. Prior to joining Bayzat, Tarek spent 7 years at GE in various positions and multiple geographies. During his time at GE, Tarek became the first Middle East employee to reach the executive ranks of GE's most prestigious leadership program for corporate audit staff. Tarek also led various finance and consulting engagements across capital, healthcare, and energy businesses within GE. Tarek graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Computer Software Engineering from McGill University in the USA. Gentlemen, a warm welcome and thank you both for joining us today. Talal, our pleasure. So Talal, my first question is for you. Why Bayzat? Did you wake up one morning and think this will be a great idea for a startup?
It's a question I ask myself till today. So I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I always felt like the corporate life wasn't really for me. And that started from when I graduated university. I was always working at, small and mid-sized companies, and always had many ideas as well. And I think, probably had a running mental list of 20 ideas at the time when I was getting the itch to start something on my own. But that's where the value of a co-founder or co-founders come in, because of all the ideas, this one stood out to we have a third co-founder, Brian, and he actually was the one who started pushing us to start this idea. He said, I love it, let's do it together. And the reality is, when we started the company, we weren't thinking about what does it look like building a company, hiring 150 people, raising, tens of millions of dollars. It was very much focused on a problem we saw in the financial services space, and, very naively said, let's just tackle this problem. I guess you have to be naive to start your own company in some ways.
Yeah, look, absolutely, Talal. And I think it's great, when you just embrace something and go for it. And so, Tarek, moving along to you, you were initially an investor before you joined Bayzat. What made you give up the corporate job at GE and join?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to Talal, I've always kind of had a desire to be an entrepreneur. Talal and I have started at least 2 failed businesses before starting Bayzat at a much younger age. So I think we always had that itch. And I think there's, a huge misconception that, if you want to start something, you need to, quit your job, eat tuna out of a can, and work out of your parents' garage. I think, every entrepreneur's story takes a different path, but, Bayzat in the early days started with everyone fully employed in their jobs, and, Talal took the first leap of faith. He's always been the more adventurous one, and then I followed subsequently, and then our third co-founder after that.
Excellent. So it's grown organically. There was a bit of risk there, passion, commitment, and let's do this. Great to hear. So we are fortunate enough in the GCC to have this diverse combination of talent and entrepreneurship. So we will continue to see a lot of exciting emerging technology businesses and startups in the UAE. Talal, can you tell us about the Bayzat team with reference to your structure, leadership, culture, hiring and diversity?
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're 150 team members strong across 3 offices. So here in the UAE is around 75% of the team, and the remainder is split between our office in Ankara and our office in Mumbai. And, we started off as an extremely young team, primarily males, because we were hiring engineers. This is, 8 years ago. Back then, I wouldn't say there's too many female software engineers in the UAE, but that's been changing. So we've seen actually the development of the UAE and all their initiatives, right? Them investing more heavily in local universities. So we started, now we hire primarily from local universities here in the UAE, and we're starting to get great talent as well. And in terms of the team, we're 6 executives, 10 VPs, and then it's a pretty flat structure. So, we're all hands-on, and we try to work in as small teams as possible. And that's been a big learning, right? After 30 team members, you can easily become a slow dinosaur, right? We saw that. You just have to keep staying focused on speed, being able to maneuver nimbly. And that's been a big learning for us, is to always, each year rethink how teams are structured, how the company is structured, and keep trying to keep the team small.
Yeah, look, absolutely. You've kept moving, haven't you, in the past 8 years, Talal? And just continuing on with that, what do the successful people at Bayzat have in common?
Yeah, I mean, we've, obviously evolved from an HR perspective, in terms of, building core competencies, understanding how to hire people, how to evaluate people. But I would say, to work in this type of a high-paced environment, the first one is being comfortable with ambiguity. Everything is ambiguous at this stage, from how you have to do something to where we're going exactly. We know where the North Star is, but how we're going to get there is obviously an evolving journey. So being comfortable with ambiguity is extremely important, and it's pretty tough to find people who don't get stressed out and burnt out by not having a clear path all the time. And then I would say the second one is having a passion, hunger, drive to be the best. Not necessarily be the best at the specific job role, but be the best at something. Because as you're scaling this quickly, there's so much to do, and you're exposed to so many growth and learning opportunities. And if you have that passion to be the best, and again, could be the best engineer, be the best colleague, be the best speaker, whatever that is, then you're going to embrace these opportunities, and you're going to embrace the chaos to keep growing yourself.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Ambiguity and to be the best at what you're doing, they're really important core competencies nowadays, particularly in startups. Tarek, if we could come to you, what gets the Bayzat people excited, and how do you drive commitment and engagement with them?
Yeah, I think a common thread that's been sewn across the company is really this desire to grow and develop. I think it across all embodies that. And whether it's at the most macro level, trying to change an industry that has been the same for 50, 60 years, or at a more micro level, it's trying to do in and I think second key thing is we have a no a-holes policy at Bayzat, so no jerks. So people really feel that they can bring their authentic self to the company on a daily basis, and they're surrounded by people that support them and are rooting for them, albeit with a healthy competitive spirit.
Yeah, that's important. Now, this question is for both of you. Any advice for our audience? This is a question from the audience when working with family members.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think for us, so definitely there's pros and cons, but the pros are outweigh the cons by a pretty big margin, and that is, trust, right? Being able to unequivocally trust someone, know they're going to be around, and know they have the same intentions and goals. You can't undervalue that. It's impossible. In terms of challenges, again, it's probably around some of your baggage from your childhood coming up when you're having, intense debates. But that's really where having an open culture is important, and having, the right people, especially at a sort of leadership level, who are able to, facilitate between the two of you and keep everyone focused on the intended objectives. So I would say we haven't had too much friction. I guess I don't know if this is a pro or con, but you don't hang out as much anymore socially because you're sick of seeing their face every single day. But that's that's my perspective.
Yeah, there's an upside and downside to everything. And it's amazing what you remember from your childhood, Talal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Tarek, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, nothing I would add per se. I think the other the probably one thing, you know, I report into Talal, so I think it's relevant for me to say is kind of checking your ego at the door is critical. You know, if you're gonna debate, you know, who's the better football club, Real Madrid or Barcelona, and your personal time, that's completely fine. But when you show up, kind of conducting yourself professionally, keeping your ego in check, and just understanding, you know, we're all here to accomplish the same objective.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about a balance there, isn't it? So gentlemen, let's change gears now and start getting into the meaty stuff. Let's talk about Bayzat's strategic direction and business model. So when I looked at the current Bayzat website, it really screamed out at me about automation and accessibility for SMEs by providing employee benefits and health support. However, let's go back to where it all started in 2013. Bayzat was a B2C platform offering banking and insurance products. So Talal, what was the impetus for Bayzat to pivot? And tell us more about the current Bayzat business model.
Yeah, sure. So for everyone's context, we launched as a price comparison website in late 2013 where consumers in the US not our end goal at the time, but we said this is, you know, a good sort of beta version to launch and get some traction. And we started having doubts about the business model. And one thing that, you know, stuck with me personally from very early on was first was sunk cost bias, right? So, you know, typically if you spend time or money on something, you start becoming biased and, you know, you stick with it for too long because you've already started. But then the second one was also just always looking at the cold hard facts and understanding that wishful thinking is pretty useless, right? If something's not working, it's not going to start working on its own. You have to make some fundamental changes. So we were having some doubts about the business model because we saw that would be difficult to create, you know, a lot of value for the customer. And from an economic perspective, the unit economics were going to be too tough. And while we were having these doubts, as you typically do, you get lucky sometimes. And Dubai passed a law saying it was going to become mandatory for every employer to provide health insurance for their employees. And that exposed us to the reality that SMEs face around managing and engaging their people. And that's when we decided to pivot. And today, Bayzat's sole focus is on its mission, which is to make a world-class employee experience accessible to every company. And what that means for our customers is that regardless of their size, regardless of their budget on technologies, on insurance, regardless of the size of their HR and finance teams, we can enable them to provide their employees with a world-class experience. And the way we achieve that is by, one, automating and enhancing their processes, right? So leave management, attendance, payroll, employee records, so that they can save time and spend more time on their people. And the second is by providing amazing technology to their employees, right? So that lives on the mobile app, where last month employees used it over 700,000 times to get care through their health insurance, to get a mental health consultation, or to do self-service across their HR processes. So that's sort of where Bayzat is at today. And when you think about the North Star, it's really, when are we satisfied that we've become the gold standard, not only in the eyes of the employer, but especially in the eyes of the employees. So when employees at a significant scale start expecting their company to provide Bayzat to them.
Excellent. And I think you've answered one of our audience questions already, Talal, but I'm just going to read out the question if there's anything you'd like to add, or Tarek. What does Bayzat do in terms of the problem they are trying to solve? Is there anything that you would like to add to that audience question?
Sorry, that was to Tarek. Go ahead, Tarek.
Yeah, I mean, I think Talal hit the nail on the head with his explanation. I think one thing that really kind of stuck out to us along the journey to where we are now is a lot of people on the outside were trying to put us in a box. So if I think of investors or potential competitors, you know, we heard a lot of, are you a broker? Or are you a technology company? Right? We would kind of hear that a lot. And what we found from a lot of research and a lot of initiatives we have around customer intimacy is actually our clients don't differentiate that. They think of us as a platform to manage their employee life cycle and their employee benefits and deliver that employee experience that is world class. And insurance is kind of one vertical of that entire experience. And you know, that was kind of the biggest takeaway for us from, you know, the research we had done is our customers don't care to put us in a box. They're on the receiving end of the experience and they're completely fine with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tarek, in which countries are Bayzat currently operating and how many clients do you have? Are they all UAE or do you have clients across the region or beyond?
Yeah, so we have 1,000 customers. The majority of those customers are in the UAE, but we do serve customers in over 14 countries, and that would usually happen where their headquarter office is in the UAE and we're, you know, supporting their organization on a global level.
Thanks, Tarek. So we're starting to get a few questions around fundraising. So I think it's opportune now for me to talk fundraising. And I think that's what everybody wants to talk about, particularly in a startup. So historically, the GCC and particularly the UAE are markets of early adoption of new technologies, providing a healthy ecosystem in the region for tech and fintech startups. According to CNBC, we've seen in the last year, despite COVID, more than $600 million of investment into startups in the UAE alone. And the ingredients are there for a much, much bigger trajectory in the UAE and across the GCC. So just to reiterate, Bayzat has raised $35 million to date. So congratulations again to you both. But Talal, let's go back to where it all started, about Bayzat's first successful pitch for seed funding, with a particular emphasis on your strategy. Who was your first investor and how did you convince them to sign on?
So when, you know, we were going out to raise money in 2013, there wasn't really a big sort of a startup investor base in the UAE. You know, today you have accelerators, seed investors, angel investors. None of that really existed back then. I think there was really just one established venture capital firm in the region. So we basically just started reaching out to individuals and we ended up raising $350,000. 50% of it was from friends and family, but 50% of it was from people we didn't know before. And the common theme across all our fundraising rounds is treating it more like a sales exercise and making sure, you know, it's time consuming, right? So the reality is your biggest indicator of success is how many people you're talking to. And that's, you know, it's just that simple. It's simple, but it's really hard work. Of course, you want to keep refining your pitch, right? So again, back then it was a bit different because a lot of these angels weren't used to getting pitched to. Today, if you pitch someone, they'll give you some, you know, pretty tough feedback about how you did. Back then, it was just a lot more follow-ups, I would say. But you have to always read the room, reflect on what went right, what went wrong, and continue refining your pitch. But at the end of the day, there's no substitute to just getting out of your comfort zone. Doesn't matter if you're an introvert or extrovert. You know, I'm the former. And just pounding the phones, emailing people, being extremely nagging with your follow-ups. And then you get there slowly but surely.
Yeah, definitely. And no doubt there were a few doors closed in your face along the way, but you kept going. So having raised capital and most recently with your Series B funding where you raised $16 million, You will know, obviously, that prospective investors will typically conduct a due diligence process before they're willing to sign on. Tarek, can I turn this back now on Bayzat? What is Bayzat's due diligence process on prospective investors and clients? Are you just focused on the cash, or does Bayzat consider other criteria such as the organisation's purpose and values alignment with Bayzat?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll talk about the investor piece. I think our thinking around this has changed with time and experience. In the early days, we took whatever cash we could get from an investor perspective. And that was really driven by the fact that the ecosystem wasn't as large as it is today. And although there's a lot more investors participating in the earlier parts of the fundraising journey, the number of investors kind of Series B onwards starts becoming a lot thinner. So I think we've taken the approach initially of take what money you can. And I think as we've grown as we've, in terms of size, but also as we've kind of grown in terms of experience, it's definitely critical to have investors on the board that have a shared vision. There has to be some level of chemistry there. And when the going gets rough, do you feel like these are people that are gonna have your back?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're looking, as you're evolving, you are looking for alignment on a number of levels, and it isn't just only about the money, is it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, looking ahead and saying, where do we want to be as a company by the next fundraise? Where do we want to be in the next 2 years? Is this investor going to help us get there in any way outside of just money? And it's okay to have an and having a mix on the board is critical. Having a diversity of what investors are going to bring is helpful.
And improving your services. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, 16 million sounds like a lot, but the most money I ever felt that we had was the first round we raised when it was $350,000, and it was 4 of us, myself and 3 engineers, and we didn't even have to pay office rent. Seemed like it would last forever. But with 16 million, it's all about scaling, and the way to scale and the way to grow faster is by continuing to invest in the value you provide to customers, right? So for us, it's, we're not an asset heavy business, don't have, very complex working capital requirements. It's really about hiring the right people, spending on marketing, but especially how do we continue enhancing our product and value proposition to create more stickiness and continue acquiring more customers, primarily here in the UAE.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's actually a great question that I'm going to throw to in the chat. It's from Kinshuk. He's a global MBA student from SP Jain School of Global Management. And he, along with 2 colleagues, are working on a research project on understanding the various functionalities of online fundraising platform for startups. Kinshuk would like to understand the journey and features that both of you have faced while raising funds and challenges faced in this.
To online platforms where companies can raise money. When we started, I believe, when we were looking at second round, there was one out there was called Eureka, and I'm still not sure if it's the right call or not. But back then, the biggest problem we found was that you're not actually getting to meet any of these investors, and you're providing quite a bit of data upfront, right? Confidential data around your strategy numbers. That made us a little uncomfortable, to be honest. But having said that, I think in an early stage where you're just have an idea and you're looking to launch, it could be very useful platforms, because you don't have that much confidential data to give out. And the second is you have a lot of brand ambassadors, right? If you have a lot of people with small ticket sizes, you end up having a lot of brand ambassadors and support with that regards. But that's as much I can speak to those.
Great response, Talal. And there's another question here that we have. What is the dilution you made in your first round of 350,000 and now 16 million?
So look, typically in the seed round, so you have to manage dilution because subsequent investors want to make sure that the founder team have enough skin in the game. But it's not the end of the world if you get diluted quite a bit upfront, and I'll explain that in a bit. But if I recall correctly, the dilution was around 10% in that first round, maybe 10 to 12%. And that's, every single round we've done has been, between 10 to 20%. Now, the rounds, their terms ask you to issue more ESOP. So they want you to allocate more shares, put them on the side for employees, which include you as a founder or you as co-founders. So that's why I said it's not the end of the world if you get diluted early on, because if you do make it and you're raising a big round, that new investor will force on all the previous shareholders to dilute themselves so that they can issue more shares to the employees and the founders.
Great, thanks. Talal, Tarek, anything to add?
No, I think Talal hit all the right points.
We do have just a quick question here from a member of the audience. Are you a public listed company?
Not yet.
Watch this space. That's what you're saying. Okay, so I just want to, I was reading the Arabian Business the other night, and it was talking about the GCC startup funding ecosystem is in slow, particularly with the impact of the last year and the pandemic. So investors are now choosing more carefully where to invest in the wake of the market, seeing a correction in valuation. However, there's also been a switch within the investor community, particularly of late, with some of the private equity firms looking into the venture capital space to join the fast emerging technology sector, and in particular fintech. So Tarek, if I could just ask this question of you, in this context, will Bayzat need to rethink future strategy, investor strategy and value building, and why or why not?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we've always been focused on, building a sustainable a business for the long run, and not necessarily focused on building a business that's sexy for fundraising or a sexy business for exit. We believe all those other things would follow if you built something of value that people wanted. And I don't think that philosophy has really changed in this environment. I think kind of valuations to a certain extent on a global level in this space, we're starting to get a little bit out of whack. So a correction is probably not a bad thing for the long-term fundamentals. a lot of the funding that happens in the early stage are, family offices, wealthy investors, and they invest directly into startups versus a seed fund or a VC fund. So the risk of having them invest at very high valuations and companies going bust is that for the medium term, a lot of those investors kind of write off VC investing as an asset class, and that to my in my view would be much more detrimental. So I think corrections and valuations isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, thanks, Tarek. And we've got 3 really great questions here in the chat around fundraising. So if you were given the chance to start a new company from scratch today as successful founders, what opportunities would you consider, assuming you could easily raise funds?
Yeah, I won't share my list of ideas publicly right now. I'll keep that to myself. But I definitely, will start another company, hopefully in my lifetime. And the reality is, the most successful founders, in the US, a lot of VCs look for these types of founders are people who are on their second or third startup. And whether or not their first startup even succeeded or failed, right? Because just the amount of learning you get, you're gonna be so much more efficient with the capital you raise and the capital you deploy. Not to say that it's gonna be easy. I would say I assume the second one will be just as hard, if not harder than the first one. But the level of maturity and experience I have now will allow me to be even more successful in a second startup.
Yeah, absolutely. Another great question here in the chat, just a general one though. How does a company go about raising funds? I have a pitch deck ready. Whom and how do I pitch it?
Yeah, so I think the first part is getting some feedback about your pitch deck, right? So if it sounds like you're in very early stage, so probably data room and things like that aren't necessary. But just your pitch deck has to have a story, and that's the story you want to tell, right? In conversations with investors, you get a lot of questions, but questions, and for you to actually be able to get the best quality feedback about your pitch deck, it has to be in a live pitching environment. So I would say, get some initial feedback about your deck. Does the structure make sense? Does the story make sense? And then go out there and start pitching. Make sure that you're thinking and talking big. People want, someone who's thinking very big, and not just because they want, your margin of error, right? If you're thinking I'm going to be 100 billion and you have a path to show that, probably not going to land there, but even if you land at 1%, you're good. But if you're pitching a story that we're going to be worth $10 million, then that's not an exciting story for anyone, because again, all more likely to fall short than to exceed our targets and goals.
Sure. We've got another question. Let's circle back to Bayzat. Would you consider the SPAC, the SPAC approach going forward? This is from Ashish in the audience.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I visualize the exit because visualization is very powerful, but I don't think about it every single day. Again, I'm just focused on the team and our customers. And SPAC, I mean, I've always had in the back of my mind I prefer a strategic private sale than going public. I don't want to handle all the restrictions and admin work, but look, I'm not going to complain if and going public through an SPAC. But today, I'm visualizing what the company is going to look like when we exit versus exactly what the mechanism of that exit will be.
Okay, and we're getting the questions coming through fast and thick now, so I'm going to keep on with them. And once you've raised the funds, this is from Vikram, does the investors' network become your network?
I mean, yes, it can become your network. Investors, right? That's always the best way for them to get comfort that this is a company worth investing in. So from that perspective, yes, definitely your investor should be, and you want to be pushing them to make introductions to other investors. Now you're talking about, just the more general network around business advice, customers, etc. It can be, but as with all things, you need to put in the work and be pushy, right? We're all busy. There's, always noise, things going on in our lives and our businesses. So you still have to make it happen, and you have to be pushy about it. But definitely, they will help.
And we have a question from Ankit here. How many investors did you meet before getting the funding amount?
The most recent round, I believe I reached out to over 100 investors, met with 50 of them over first calls, and then traveled to I think 4 or 5 different countries to have in-person meetings. So it was just a sales funnel from outreach to first stage, second stage, closing. But yeah, that was over 100 we started with.
Sure. We have a question here from Kaustub, and Tarek, feel free to jump in any time. Did you or would you consider raising money from a corporate VC fund? What are the benefits from your POV as an entrepreneur on strategic investors versus financial VCs? So maybe the first part of the question, Tarek, would you consider raising money?
Yeah, we've done both. So we do have strategic investors and financial investors. I think kind of with the strategic investor, there's pros and cons. The pros involve, things like deep domain expertise in the space, things around being able to accelerate growth. I think the cons are if there isn't clear alignment from the very beginning on the independence of the startup to make decisions, that can start getting very hairy. With our strategic investors, we kind of said from the very beginning, when you sit on the board, on the Bayzat board, you're putting on your Bayzat hat and you're leaving your other hat outside the room. And credit to our investor, they did just that. I think where we've seen strategic investors going wrong is where they're starting to try to dictate product roadmap, the vision of the company, and those things start becoming counterproductive.
And speaking of hairy, we have another question from Ashish. What is your big, hairy, audacious goal with Bayzat?
I think it was, what I mentioned earlier on, which was becoming the gold standard in the eyes of employees when it comes to employee benefits. Not many B2B or SaaS companies are able to achieve that. There's, probably a small handful of examples. It's very difficult to do, but we feel that's where, we really win. So I think that is a pretty big, very audacious goal. In terms of legacy, that's I can get pretty philosophical there. I'm not really in it, to be honest, for legacy. I don't really think, we leave behind long-lasting legacies, but at least in terms of the context of Bayzat's lifetime, I think for me, it's, we provided a place for people to come, work, improve themselves, and become better people.
Sure. And Tarek, anything from your side?
Yeah, I was going to say, if whoever kind of took a pit stop in their career at Bayzat, I definitely want them to be able to look back and say, one, it was a place where they learned, it was the foundation where they built kind of a lot of what they know, and it opened up their eyes to a way of thinking that revolves around just being better every day. And the second thing is, it was one of the best, if not the best place they worked at.
Excellent. We've got a few questions around profitability. Are you profitable? And are you in the positive?
We're not profitable right now, and it's not really something the board wants us to pursue. So the reality is it's about, unit economics. So how long do you keep a customer for, and how much revenue do you generate from that customer over their lifetime as a customer? And then how much did it cost you to acquire the customer, right? Unit economics. And if that's a positive formula, then the reality is they want you to acquire as many customers as possible, right? As long as that holds true, right? Your lifetime revenue is greater than your cost of acquisition by a pretty decent margin. So for us, it's really about continuing to invest in the company, in the value proposition, and acquiring more and more customers. That's the primary focus right now.
Okay. Thanks, Talal and Tarek. Let's just take it back to challenges and risks. Tarek, what are or is the biggest risk and biggest challenge right now to Bayzat, and why?
Yeah, so, I think a lot of what I spend time thinking about is our own inertia as we've kind of grown to this level. Making sure that we have the right focus to execute the game plan. I think that's definitely a challenge. And I think over the past 6 months, we've done a pretty, I'd give us kind of a B+ in terms of managing that challenge. I think there's always risks in any business, and I think it's just about problem solving for those risks. The journey of, we talk to a lot of startups on a global level, and it's just funny to, sometimes we have this perception that, it's a little bit harder because we're in the Middle East, or it's a little bit more difficult because we're in a different market. And I think the biggest thing from talking to other startups around the world is just very, very difficult. There's a lot of risks, there's a lot of challenges, and the role of the entrepreneur is being the never-ending problem solver, right? It doesn't get easier, it doesn't get smoother, you don't get more clarity. It's just solving one problem after another. And I think that's the most exciting part of being an entrepreneur.
Sure. Just going back again to the chat, we've got a couple more great questions. What would you do differently? What lessons have you learnt from the experience of building the business?
So I think, the first one is making sure that you're going after a very large addressable market from early on. That's probably the number one indicator for investors that this investment could be successful. It's number one indicator of how fast the company will grow, because the larger the addressable market, the larger the margin of error, and you need a large margin of error in the early days. The second one I would say is being very honest about what's working and not working, and about product market fit. And then the third one is, focus, right? And focus doesn't mean you can't do a lot of things, but do one thing at a time. Get it to the level where you want it before moving on to something else.
Great. And for both of you, have you ever done an elevator pitch? If yes, how did it turn out?
I can't say, I mean, the elevator pitch, at least for me, was more in the form of emails, right? Because when you're, when you're doing cold outreach to investors, you need pretty good emails to catch their attention and get them to respond. And that's something that I spent a lot of time on. As I mentioned, I reached out to 100 plus investors for the last round. And that's, something that you continuously refine, and you start learning things like how you have to personalize it, how you have to do research, etc. But back to the elevator pitch, I mean, one thing I said early on was, when you have the pitch deck is you have to control the conversation and the story. So don't focus on, I need a 2-minute pitch versus what's my actual story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess I'll add one of lists out there, but the main thing I would say is, you don't want to just take someone's list and use it. You have to put in the time to do research about these investors so that you understand what kind of companies they're investing in, and find ones that are looking at themes like what you're building and tailor your communication and your story to that, right? That was how we got our anchor investor in the Series B round, was looking at a lot of the things they're investing in, sending them, personalized communications around, hey, you've done investments in these companies. This is where we fit within the same type of story and strategy, and this is how we're different, or this is how we're better than them, etc. So, make sure that you're putting in the time to understand who you're pitching to and who you're reaching out to.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just go back to the beginning very quickly. Who did you turn to for mentorship support early on? This is a question from Ashish.
I think, look, early on, it was very, it was basically based off our needs, right? And a lot of that was, us reaching out to people asking, do you know someone who's really good at marketing? Do you know a company that's done very well on sales? Who do you know on the engineering side? But then also us reaching out to people on LinkedIn, right? So we would actually reach out to, VP of really large company, and obviously it takes follow-ups, it takes work, but just getting out of your comfort zone and reaching out to people for specific topics where you need help.
Absolutely. And cheekily, come on, Talal, give me the list. We'll leave that between you and Ahmed. We've got a question from Drew. How many series raised till now? Are you revenue positive? I think we've covered that already. Do you need further capital or series funding? If yes, how many? So I guess, Talal and Tarek, are we going to see a Series C round of funding?
Probably. I mean, we've done 4 to 5 rounds now. And again, as long as we're able to continue scaling at a reasonable unit economics, we'll continue raising money to capture more and more. Because, the reality is you always want to be a top 2 to 3 player in whatever space you're in. That's where you realize a premium when it comes to exits, and that's where you realize economies of scale to actually become highly profitable.
Okay, and I think we've got time just for one more question. Would you outsource your programming off your platform rather than hiring programmers to develop your app?
So we reached out to, back to the question about mentors, that was a question we had, and we reached out to a lot of people in the early days, and unanimously they all said, it's one of your core competencies, you have to do it in-house. Now, having said that, when, we were just two to three guys and we didn't really have too much money, we didn't want to lose time going out to hire, 3-4 engineers just to build the first version. So what we did was we got an agency to develop, the first version of our platform, just so we can get something live and out to the market. But while we were doing that, we were interviewing engineers. So by the time they were done, we actually had one hire who took over the project, and then we started hiring more people. And that was just because we didn't want to lose time. Now, again, back then, maybe it wasn't very common for people to go work for startups. I think these days it could be slightly different. But regardless of how you start, yeah, in the near or medium term, you eventually have to bring it in-house.
So as we're just bringing it to a close now, gentlemen, Kareem was bought by Uber in 2019 for 3.1 billion. Angami, the first legal music streaming platform in the Middle East and North Africa, recently announced they'll be the first Arab tech company to list on New York's NASDAQ. What does future success look like for Bayzat?
I mean, look, I think for us, it's defined, again, I know I'm a broken record, but by our customers and how they view us and achieving that gold standard. Obviously, we want to have a big exit. And, we want to be a big success story for the region. I mean, I've, grown up in the UAE, so I think if I can be part of helping put them on the map as a hub for technology and startups would be amazing. Having said that, I think, there's just a day-to-day focus. You know where you want to go, you know where you need to be, but it's just about being better tomorrow than we were today. And that's something, I guess I'll leave it as a parting sort of advice, right? I went to CLA, so there's a famous coach there called John Wooden, and he's the most successful basketball coach in history. They went undefeated 2 seasons in a row, and they had like a 99% win record over 4 seasons. And one thing that stood out about him is in his biography is that when they interviewed his team members, they all said that he never once spoke about winning or losing, not a single time. And he never once in a game spoke about the scoreline. All he cared about was them doing the best they could and every single day getting better. And that's sort of how my mindset and our mindset has evolved over the past, 2 years.
Thank you, gentlemen. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a round of virtual applause for Talal Bayaa and Tarek Bayaa from Bayside, 2 entrepreneurs who are well on their way to becoming the next unicorn. Talal and Tarek, thank you, and we wish you both every success. To our audience, we would invite you to complete our event poll. Thank you and have a lovely evening.